Welcome back to our Light from the Light channel. We're continuing to look at other promises that God has made to us that are not in the little promise book that I wrote. And so today's memory verse comes from Psalm 25. This is another tremendous psalm. I just love the Psalms. And in Psalm 25, verse 2, we find our memory verse. So let's say it together. Psalm 25, 2. Oh my God, I trust in you. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Psalm 25, 2. Now, this is a psalm that challenges us to follow David in his confidence in the Lord as he faces his enemies. Now, we may not face enemies in a military sense or even in a political sense, but we do face different adversities in life, things that are obstacles that we have to overcome. And sometimes it just seems like the circumstances of life just are against us. And so it comes down to the same thing. That is, that we need to trust in God. But this psalm is not a thanksgiving psalm like we looked at recently or a praise psalm. It is expressed as a lament. So that is a technical term. It means that David is coming to the Lord with a problem in his life that seems overwhelming, and he's appealing to God to intervene in his situation. And this psalm also involves a confession of sin that is seen in verses 6 and 7. So in Psalm 25, 6, we read, Remember, O Lord, your loving mercies and your loving kindnesses, for they are from of old. Now, I have uh, changed a word there that is used to translate mercy. It's translated in the King James as tender mercies, but I think loving mercies. It's the word in Hebrew, raham, which means a very tender, intense love. It is often used of the love of a mother for a child. And so that is the focus on God's intense love for us and his merciful love for us and his loving kindnesses. And that is another very important word in Hebrew, hesed. And hesed has the idea of God's faithful, loyal love, God's dependable love, his covenant love. And so sometimes people say, well, a covenant love doesn't sound very personal. Well, then what about the personal love you expressed for your spouse when you got married and you swore a covenant, you swore an oath to love them no matter what circumstances might come in life? That was a legal contractual relationship. And so we often think that that is somehow not very personal or romantic when it's at the very core of having a steady, stable, romantic relationship. So in this verse, David is focusing on God's character, his racham mercies, his loving kindness, and then he says, "I don't remember the sins of my youth nor my transgression." So obviously, he's feeling very intense about the fact that somewhere along the line in his past he has sinned and he needed forgiveness. So in this particular passage, I have translated the word tender mercies as intense love, focusing on that. And then loving kindness is God's faithful, loyal covenant love. What's interesting is that we look down to verse 7. We see that according to your mercy, remember me, and that is chesed there. So that should be retranslated as loving kindness. To be consistent drives me nuts when translators within a couple of verses will change the English translation, and that allows us to be confused because we don't see what the verbal connections are within a particular passage. So, again and again through the Psalms, we see David appealing to God's faithful, loyal love. It's used again even in verse 10. All the paths of the Lord are mercy and truth. Mercy translates chesed, so it should be your faithful, loyal love and truth. And so there's a lot going on in this psalm. As a matter of fact, if you look at it, there are various words that are used for trust. One of them is the word that we see initially, batak, which means to have confidence in God. And in other places, it has the idea of taking refuge. Verse 20, let me not be ashamed, for I put my trust, I take refuge in you. And the other idea that is connected several times is the word for waiting. And so we look at verse 3, it says, indeed, let no one who waits on you be ashamed. And then when we look down at verse 5, the last line says, on you I wait all the day. So we're to be waiting on the Lord, resting, not impatient. And then we look to verse 21 in the psalm, and there it says, let integrity and uprightness preserve me, for I wait for you. So he is expressing his trust. Often the word for wait is tied up with the concept of hope in the scriptures, and hope emphasizes the fact that we have a confident expectation in God. Also, we have running through here this emphasis on his forgiveness of sin. And 25, verse 7, as I've already stated, he says, don't remember the sins of my youth. Then in verse 11, for your name's sake, O Lord, pardon my iniquity, for it is great. Now, we don't know what circumstances surrounded this, but obviously there is a sin that David committed that he is very concerned about. Verse 16, he calls upon God, turn yourself to me and have mercy on me, for I'm desolate and afflicted. Verse 17, the troubles of my heart have enlarged, bring me out of distresses. And so all of this emphasizes an intensity, a very significant pressure in his life. And throughout this, we see that there's an urgency for God to intervene. Even though he says, I'm waiting on you, there's an urgency here. I think all of us have felt this kind of pressure from the circumstances of life at some point or another. I can think of times under financial pressure when I was young that, I had more bills than I had money. And you're under financial pressure and trying to figure out how to stretch that dollar to last all the way to the end of the month. And at other times, we don't know what to do about some situation that involves our kids or some situation that may involve our parents, especially if we're taking care of older parents, situations that involve coworkers, finding a job, all kinds of different situations where we just feel that pressure very intensely. And it's that kind of a situation that David finds himself in. And his example is meant to encourage us. So, one of the first things we should do when we hit a situation like that is to examine ourselves to see if perhaps what we're going through is that related to some sin in our life, and that God is bringing natural consequences to bear because of bad decisions that we have made because of sin. And if that's the case, then we need to confess our sin and then cry out to God to intervene in our circumstances. We see that in this psalm, and most psalms, they're deeply personal, but there's a phrase here at the very beginning that focuses us on that. In verse 1, David is saying, to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. He's saying, I'm putting my life in your hands. And so we feel that intensity. And then he goes on to say in verse 2, oh my God, I trust in you. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. So the word here of trust indicates a confidence, a strong confidence in God. And he's appealing to God in conformity with this. So he's saying, God, intervene. I don't want you to be embarrassed. People know that I trust you. People know that I'm relying upon you. So don't fail me now, because that would be an embarrassment to you. Please, he's saying to God, be faithful to your covenant promise. Your character is at stake here. So this is a rationale we find often in the Psalms, that God's reputation is at stake because I've trusted you, and I expect and hope for you to intervene in this situation. And that goes on in that vein until verse 3. Indeed, let no one who waits on you be ashamed. Let those be ashamed who deal treacherously without a cause. And so throughout this section, we see these appeals to God's goodness and his righteousness. He also alludes to God's grace. For example, verse 8, good and upright is the Lord. Therefore, he teaches sinners in the way. So he's saying, Lord, you're good and upright, so intervene. But there's this secondary theme that runs all the way through here, and that's the idea that God is teaching us and God is instructing us. And we see these kinds of verbs. For example, in verse 4, he says, show me your ways, O Lord, teach me your paths. And then down in verse 8, therefore he teaches sinners in the way. Verse 9, and the humble he teaches his way. And then we go down to verse 12. Who is the man that fears the Lord? Him shall he teach the way he chooses. So again and again, we are reminded that God uses these circumstances to teach us to rely upon God. And so we come to God expecting him to answer our prayers and to intervene, that his reputation is at stake. And so he cries out to God to intervene in this situation. We can look down to verse 16 where he says, turn yourself to me and have mercy on me, for I am desolate and afflicted. The troubles of my heart have enlarged. Bring me out of my distresses. So in his appeal, he trusts in God. He relies upon him. He has confidence in God. And so should we. So let's repeat this promise again. Psalm 25:2. Oh my God, I trust in you. Or you may paraphrase it. Oh God, I have confidence in you. Let me not be ashamed. Let not my enemies triumph over me. Psalm 25:2. We could paraphrase it this way. Oh my God, I have confidence in you. Let me not be ashamed of my trust in you. Let not my circumstances overwhelm me. Uh, and that would be how we paraphrase it to make it a little more, have that sense of what's happening today in our life. So Psalm 25:2, a tremendous psalm to use in a prayer when we are being overwhelmed by circumstances. And so next time we'll come back and begin to go through even more promises from God that we need to memorize, internalize, and make part of our thinking.